I'll go with that. So flat enough as that is, if I clamp it down on the middle there, it'll hold it down. Just to get those two edges cleaned off as a reference surface so that I can then turn it over, flatten that off. This is going to be the face of the jaws, so these pieces need to be flat. But I can't put them on the table like that because, well, ain't right, is it? Carry on with that because that's going to have the tendency to lift the part off of the plate. Take the cut the other way, it'll have the tendency to push the part off the plate. I've got it clamped tight, but not that tight. With that end cut flat and approximately square to the whole thing, setting it up and resting it now down on a flat block, this end is now going to be made parallel, as far as that goes, parallel to that end. So I'm gradually establishing more and more faces at right angles to each other. I'm going to take that as square. Not that it's that critical, but it's square enough. did take one more cut on that face, it's not come out too badly. But here's the jaw casting with all of its outside surfaces flattened and square, as square as it's going to be anyway. All the dimensions are still oversize. All I've done is take a thin cut on each edge just to get it square and flat. Now I want to try and assess where the centre of these bosses are, if I need to take off more from one side or the other on these faces here, so that we can keep these bosses central to the whole thing, because they need to be bored out to accept bolts that are going to bolt it down to the vice bolster. So, a job for later. Tinker about measuring which edge I think can have the most taken off of it, and then get it down to size. Right, so got it on the table, got the mill centred up on these cast bosses in the middle there, then just travelled side to side to get this down to 75mm and these feet down to 62mm. At least they're supposed to be 62. Maybe we'll find out. .12, that will do. So it's to size on the feet and on the jaws. There'll be a bit of cleaning up to do at the end there. I'll probably leave those as casts though, and then it'll be a matter of cutting it in half, making these two bolt holes, boring them and counter boring them. That wasn't to any dimension, it was just to get both jaws same size. There is a dimension on the drawing for the height of the jaw, but the higher the better, the bigger the better. Doesn't make any difference. The position of this hole that's going to go through there doesn't have any particular dimensions on it, just says it needs to be the centre of the part. Well, found the edge on here and it is going to be in the centre of the part on the y-axis, but on the x-axis I've really just moved it in and out to get it centred on the profile of that central boss, and this is the smaller of the two bosses of the two parts. The boss on that part's slightly bigger, so drilling it in the same position there's going to be a little bit more meat on the outside of that bore than there is on this one. But at least this one is going to look centred to that boss, and on the y-axis it is centred to the part, so it will be centred to the bolster of the vice. The distance from here to this front face of the jaw to the back really doesn't make any difference. This is only going to get a centre drill on this. This is just to mark the position. The actual boring will take place when it goes in the lathe, either in the forejaw or on the faceplate, and I'll use this centre drill to centre that up for the drilling and boring. The risk is if I try to drill all the way through this part, it's such a deep drill that it might wander off, so I'd rather be doing that on the lathe than on here. That'll do for that. If the parallels on the vice stop, this should be in the exact same position. So 2 centre holes, that's where the bore's going to be. That's going to be a lot better off on the faceplate or in the 4-jaw chuck. Be able to bore that out with a bit more control. There's no real need to do this, but the rough cast bevels on the back of the jaws, just going to take those down to get some clean corners and edges. It's standing up a little bit too high, I've got to take really tiny cuts on it. There we are, 2 jaws on the outside machine down. Made up dimensions to make it fit the bolster properly here, otherwise they would have been hanging over. Nice clean bevels, flat, both the same size. Off to the lathe. Going to settle on that. That's about 2/100. Never been able to get it much closer with this chuck. It's a bit tight. It's a bit bound up on things. The drawing calls for a 12.2mm hole. That's not 12.2. It's 31/64. It's what I've got. About 12.25. It's only a bolt hole, it just needs to be big enough for the bolt to go through. So that counter bore is going to need to be 20mm away from this back face. So putting the parallels in the back, little magnet and the 20mm gauge block, and winding the compound slide until there, yeah, maybe. And that'll leave me 0.1 for a clean up cut down in the bottom of the bore when it happens. The carriage has got a stop on it. I'll leave everything else where it is so that as I finish the bore it will always come to 20mm off of that face. Back to the 0, so that should be in the corner now, squealing enough like it is. Really is quite a spectacular finish. $18.99. So all that hole has to do is accept that screw. That's what the hole's there for. Can't get that out now. Okay. It's sinking down a lot deeper than it would do by the drawing because I've left that foot a lot thicker than it says on the drawing. There's no point thinning that foot out, it'll only make it weaker. So therefore, screw needs to go down further. The last operation on those jaws is going to be to make a counterbore in that end. As usual, these things have been real hard to keep hold of all the way through. So this is a little mandrel. This is exactly the bore that is. Turn down on the end for an O-ring. A piece of the same mandrel parted off, nice and thick. Takes a bit of trial and error to get the size of that groove correct. It's very easy to do it for sealing purposes, but not for this clamping. When that screw's tightened up, there's enough grip on that rubber O-ring by itself to deal with a boring cut. That wouldn't be good enough for drilling or anything like that. You'd just make it slip, but it's only got to last for two pieces. Taking light cuts on the boring bar anyway because it's so thin. It'll work. This bore is going to have to be 8mm deep, so touch off the tool with a feeler gauge on the edge. Stop the carriage there. Wind this tool in 0.1 to take up the feeler gauge. Now wind it in 8. That would make it 8mm deep. But back it off by 0.1 so that we can make a clean up cut in the bottom once we get there. All I've got to do now is just wind the carriage backwards and forwards against the stop, and it will be 8mm deep at the end of it. These are the jaws pretty much finished. Counterbore in the top there to take screw sticking out from the bottom, just the right amount. These were set to a round number dimension of 8mm deep. (19mm) diameter. Measured with these. Measured with these, it's a bit different. They will end up on the top of that. One is going to be clamped down solid, the other one's going to be free to move on the screw. Screw will be the thing that's coming next.